Montana Territory. 1879, the wind came down hard off the crazy mountains, biting through the seams of every coat in camp, and carrying with it the sound of a woman's scream. Yates McKinley dropped his saddlebag, boots crunching over frostbitten grass as he ran toward the sound. He pushed past the fence line of the old Kavanaugh Ranch, where the smell of burnt wood and blood still lingered from last spring's raid. It was supposed to be empty now. Abandoned. He had only come to water his horse, but someone was inside. He kicked through the door with one hard boot. The room was dim, smoke curling up from a dying fire. And there she was backed against the far wall, a broken chair leg in her shaking hands, her dress torn at the sleeve and dirt smudged across her cheek. The man towering over her turned when the door cracked open. Yates did not hesitate. He raised his rifle and yelled, "Step away from her." The man, a ranch hand by the look of him, drunk and stumbling, turned with a curse. He reached for his pistol, but Yates fired first. The shot rang out like thunder in the low rafters. The man dropped. The silence that followed was sharp. The woman stared, chest rising fast, the wood still clenched in her grip. Yates lowered his rifle. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, eyes too wide. "He said he owned this land," she whispered. "Said I had no right to be here." "Looks like he was wrong," she swayed. Yates stepped in, catching her elbow before she could fall. She flinched but did not pull away. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, voice steady. She looked up at him then, and something in her face changed. Her name came out small. Mira Addington. Yates McKinley. He helped her to the bed and knelt in front of her. "You got any family nearby?" She shook her head. "None left. My father passed in April. This was our claim. He was stubborn, never filed it proper, but it was ours." Yates swallowed hard. He had seen this before. A woman alone, land unclaimed, made her a target for men who thought strength gave them rights. "You got anywhere to go?" "I have 2 children," she said. That stopped him. "They are hiding in the root cellar out back. I told them to stay quiet no matter what." Yates looked her in the eyes. "You trust me to get them?" After a pause, she nodded. He found the hatch behind the cabin, half buried under brush. He knocked twice. A soft voice answered. "I am a friend," Yates said. "Your mom sent me." A boy and a girl climbed up, no older than 5 and 7. The boy's name was Jude, the girl was Josie. They stood close together, shivering in the cold. Yates led them inside. Mira gathered them close, holding their small bodies tight. Jude looked up at Yates and said, "Do you have a horse?" "Sure do," Yates said with a nod. Josie whispered, "Is he gone now?" Yates glanced at the body and nodded. "He will not bother anyone again." They spent the night in the cabin. Yates kept his rifle across his lap, watching the door while Mira wrapped the children in blankets. When the kids finally drifted off, Mira sat across from Yates, her hands trembling as she poured hot water into a chipped tin cup. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You do not have to. I was going to lose everything, the land, the kids." Her voice caught. "You did not." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why did you help?" Yates shrugged. "Because someone should." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling low. The light caught the edge of her cheekbone, her hair falling loose around her face. Yates looked away. By sunrise, he had made a decision. "I have land," he said as he loaded his saddle. "About 30 miles west, near the Gallatin. Cabin, water, fence line. It is mine, proper filed." Mira blinked. "You are offering it." "I am offering you safe passage there. You and your children. You can stay until something better comes along." She hesitated. "That is a long ride." "I will take care of it." She nodded slowly. "All right." They rode out that morning, Mira on his second horse, the children bundled in front of her. Yates kept close, eyes scanning the horizon. He had not meant to fall into anything. But now that he had seen her seen what she was fighting to hold, it felt like something had shifted under his boots. They reached his land by dusk 2 days later. His cabin was small but clean. He helped her down, then lifted the children one by one. Josie clung to Mira's skirts. Jude stayed close to Yates. "I like your horse," Jude said. "He likes you too," Yates answered. They settled in quick. Mira cooked. Yates hauled water. The kids ran wild over the frostbit hills. He built a second bed frame just to give them more space. 2 weeks passed. Then came the offer. A man named Carlton Brigg rode up with 2 hired guns and a tight smile. He was the biggest rancher in the valley, owned nearly every acre between the river and the canyon. "You got what I want, McKinley," Briggs said, dismounting like he already owned the place. "That land of yours sits right in the middle of my cattle run." Yates stood on the porch, arms crossed, not interested in selling. Briggs smiled. "I am not here to buy." He turned to Mira, who stood in the doorway. "You came from the Addington claim, did you not? Shame about your father." "I offered him a deal. Guess he never told you." Mira's face went pale. "You marry me," Briggs said, "and I will give McKinley twice what this land is worth. Hell, I will throw in 20 head of cattle. You get a good roof, your children get a future, and he walks away rich." Mira's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Yates's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "She is worth more than your whole ranch." Briggs blinked. "What?" "I said no," Yates growled. He stepped off the porch. "You come back here again, I will put you in the ground next to that bastard who tried to take her before." Briggs' face twisted. "You are a fool." "No," Yates said. "I am in love." Mira's breath hitched. Briggs spat in the dirt and swung back onto his horse. "You will regret this." Yates did not flinch. He stood there until Briggs and his men were dust on the horizon. When he turned, Mira was still in the doorway. Her eyes were shining. "You meant that," she said quietly. "I did." She stepped down from the porch, walked right up to him, and placed her hand on his chest. Her voice shook. "I think I have loved you since the moment you opened that door." Yates leaned in. "Then we are even." He kissed her slow, careful, like the world had stopped spinning just for that moment. And it had. The first snow came late that year, falling soft and quiet over the cabin's roof while Mira stitched a patch into Jude's trousers by candlelight. Yates had taken the children outside to gather kindling from the pine brake, their laughter echoing faintly through the logs. The fire was low, but steady, warm enough to keep the cold from creeping too deep into the floorboards. Mira set her needle down and pressed her fingers to her temple. She hadn't slept much since Briggs' visit. His words still rang in her mind, not for their offer, but for the reminder of how precarious things still were. A roof, a man beside her, a land that now held their names in the county ledger, but safety felt like a thread stretched too thin. The door creaked open, and Yates stepped in with Josie bundled in one arm and Jude dragging a sack of pine cones behind. "She insisted on carrying one herself," he said, voice rough from the cold. "She's got a will," Mira replied, brushing snowflakes from Josie's hair. "Wonder where she gets that," he said, and Mira caught the flicker of a grin before he turned to unlace his boots. Jude crouched beside the stove and started stacking cones where the flames could catch them. Mira watched him for a moment, then rose and took the kettle off the hook. "There's a man in town," she said, pouring water into mugs. "Lawyer type, comes by the mercantile once a month. I heard him mention mineral rights to one of the Allridge boys." Yates looked up. "You think there's something on this land?" "I don't know," Mira said, setting his cup beside him. "But I know we need to start thinking ahead. Briggs doesn't give up easy." Yates stared into the steam rising from his drink. "I've been thinking about putting up a smokehouse, maybe a second shed come spring. If we can keep the soil turned, we'll get oats in before the thaw." The children had fallen quiet. Josie curled on the floor with her thumb in her mouth, Jude watching the flame like it might speak. Mira sat beside him. "I haven't asked why did you leave your folks' land?" Yates shifted. "My brother kept it. After the war, I didn't want to fight him over what he'd already claimed. Took my share and rode out. Figured I'd earn what I needed with my hands. Did you ever think about going back?" "No. I spent too long trying to forget what Tennessee felt like." She nodded, not asking more. Some silences were better left untouched. Later, when the children were asleep and the wind picked up again, Yates stood by the window, one hand resting on the frame. Mira joined him, her shawl wrapped tight against her shoulders. "I'm not afraid," she said, watching the branches twist in the dark. "I know," he answered, "but I worry. Every day." Yates turned, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Don't let worry steal what's worth keeping," her breath caught. "And what's that?" He hesitated, eyes on hers. "This, you, them. Every part of this life we're stitching together." She reached for his hand and held it, calloused palm to calloused palm, the room gone still around them. There was no need for more words, not then. In the morning, the children burst out into the snow, chasing one another through drifts while Yates hitched the sled to the mare. Mira packed a basket with biscuits and dried sausage, and they rode west toward the next ridge, where Yates had spotted tracks that might belong to elk. They didn't find any, but the day passed in laughter and quiet hums of contentment. Jude helped gather birch bark. Josie sang to herself. Mira leaned into Yates as the sun dipped low and gold light spilled across the frozen fields. That night, as they drifted toward sleep, Mira whispered, "You ever imagine what it would have been like if I hadn't been there that day?" Yates didn't open his eyes. "I try not to think on things I'd rather not have missed." She lay still a long while, heart steady against his chest. "Then don't ever miss them," she said. "I won't." The chill held longer than expected that spring. Ice clung to the edges of the creek well into April, and the ground stayed hard beneath the hooves of Yates's mare. Mira stood near the fence with a rake in hand, sleeves rolled above her elbows, watching Jude and Josie dig shallow furrows in the thawing soil where they'd marked out a patch for carrots. The children had grown quiet about the past, steadier in their steps, more certain in their laughter. It hadn't come all at once, but over time, one warm meal, one dry night, one safe morning at a time. Yates hammered a new plank into the south side of the barn, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. The sun had started to show itself more often these past few days, but the air still held teeth in the wind. He set the hammer down and walked toward the fence line where Mira stood. "Came across a man down by the creek," he said. "Said he was looking for the Kavanaugh place." She turned slightly. "That's been gone near a year now." I told him that. He asked a few questions, then kept on toward the eastern ridge, said he was a surveyor. Mira narrowed her eyes toward the trees. "Surveyors don't usually travel alone." "No," Yates agreed, "and not without a wagon." She leaned on the rake. "He say who he was working for, didn't offer." "I didn't ask." They stood quiet for a long moment. Josie's voice floated up from the garden bed, asking Jude if worms could feel the cold. Mira turned her gaze back to the children. "We might need to put up another fence along the back. If someone's pocking around, I'd rather they not get close enough to see what's worth looking at." Yates nodded. "I'll start on it tomorrow." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, she sat beside him at the table, sorting through a stack of old seed packets they'd found in the loft last week. Some were faded beyond reading, and a few had gone to dust inside the paper. He reached for her hand, thumb brushing the place just above her wrist where the skin had a faint scar. She didn't pull away. "You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to fight so hard for everything?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "I think I'd keep a dairy cow." Make butter every third day. Keep bees maybe. Teach Josie how to spin wool. That's not so far off. She gave a slow, tired smile. Feels farther than it is some days. He looked down at her fingers, calloused and steady. You don't have to carry it all alone. I know, she said, and this time she didn't look away. But I spent so long doing just that, it's hard to remember how not to. He stood and took the lantern from the hook, then offered her his hand. She rose without asking where he meant to lead her. Outside, the moon hung low and full above the hills. He walked her down past the barn, past the root cellar, past where the fence ended in a thicket of wild grass. There, tucked behind an old cottonwood, stood a young pear tree barely taller than Josie. I planted it last week, he said. Didn't want to say anything till I saw it take root. She stepped close, fingers brushing the thin trunk. It'll take years to bear. I'm not going anywhere. The breeze stirred between them, soft through the grass. She turned toward him, arms crossed, not from cold but habit. Neither am I, she said. He leaned in, slow and sure, and kissed her in the hush of moonlight. Not with the desperation of fear or the weight of obligation, but with the stillness of something chosen. Afterward they stood with their foreheads pressed together, the sound of the creek just faint in the distance. Come summer, she whispered, we'll build that coop. Come summer, he agreed, we'll do a lot of things. And just beyond them the pear tree held fast in the wind. By early May, the wind had lost its bite, though the morning still clung to a chill that made Mira pull her shawl tight when she went to open the hen's pen. The coop was only half finished. Yates had started framing it near the stand of aspen behind the barn, but the hens had arrived early, traded from a neighbor near the basin in exchange for a cured deer hide and a bushel of dried apples Mira had put up last fall. Josie followed behind her, dragging an empty tin pail through the grass. How many eggs today, you think? Only one way to find out, Mira said, pushing open the creaking gate and watching the hens scatter into the light. Inside, 3 eggs sat nestled in the straw. Josie gathered them carefully, her lips pursed in concentration. You carry those in, I'll finish watering, Mira said, handing her daughter the pail. Josie nodded and picked her way back toward the house. Mira turned toward the pump, gripping the handle and working it in steady rhythm. Water spilled into the trough with a sound she'd come to associate with steadiness. Yates came around the side of the cabin, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, his hair still damp from the creek. Hawk tracks near the bluff. One of the hens was limping. I saw. She's favoring her left leg. We'll need netting. I can try to trade for some in Bozeman come Saturday. Mira wiped her hands on her skirt. If you do, see if they've got any willow seed. I've been thinking about planting along the creek. He studied her a moment, then glanced toward the trees. You always think 2 steps ahead. Someone has to. He didn't argue, just pulled a folded sheet of paper from his back pocket. Mail came in yesterday. John Alberta dropped this off before riding north. She took it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper stiff with dust. She opened it slowly. The letter was from a man in Helena Henry Addington, her father's cousin. He'd heard of her father's passing and of the trouble that followed. He didn't offer sympathy, only a proposition. He'd claim guardianship over the children and bring them to the city, where they could be educated properly and raised free of frontier hardship. Mira folded the letter in half and set it on the porch rail. He means well, she said. Yates didn't speak right away. You want them to go? She looked toward the garden bed where Jude was kneeling over a row of sprouting peas, his hands caked with dirt. No, they've only just started to belong here. They don't need a city to be raised right. I know that. But I also know what people think when they see a woman trying to raise 2 children on the edge of wild land. They don't see you, Yates said. Not the way I do. She turned toward him, folding her arms, And how is that? Capable, fierce. The kind of woman who builds a life from ash and dares it to blow away again. A silence settled, but it wasn't stiff. It carried warmth, like the hush that came after a storm passed and left the air clean. Later that week, Mira took Josie into town while Yates stayed behind with Jude to repair the fence posts that had begun to lean. Mira walked through the mercantile with measured steps, buying only what they couldn't grow or barter: salt, lamp oil, a new pair of soles for Jude's boots. She kept her eyes low, aware of the stares that seemed to follow her now. Not with scorn, but with curiosity. Word had traveled. She was nearly finished when she heard a voice behind her. "You're the one McKinley wouldn't trade." Mira turned. A woman stood beside the bolts of cloth, her dress well cut and her gloves stitched with care. She looked maybe 30, maybe younger, with pale eyes and a mouth that pressed into a line too easily. "I'm Mira," she said, not bothering to soften her tone. The woman tilted her head. "I'm Margaret Brigg, Carlton's sister." Mira didn't respond. "He doesn't take losing kindly," Margaret continued, "especially not when it's to a man he considers beneath him. If he wants to measure worth in cattle and deeds, he's welcome to stay miserable." Margaret's expression didn't change. "I came to say this. Keep your eyes open. Carlton doesn't always send warning before he strikes, and if I were you, I'd make sure your children don't wander far without someone watching." Mira's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's advice." "I won't be by again." Margaret turned and left without another word. Mira stood still for a long moment, then gathered the last of her goods and took Josie by the hand. They rode home in silence. When they reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to dip. Yates was splitting logs near the barn. He looked up as Mira dismounted, catching the stiffness in her shoulders. "Something happened. Briggs' sister found me in town." He dropped the axe and came to her. "What did she say?" "She wanted to warn me or scare me, I'm not sure which." Yates's eyes narrowed. "I'll ride the edge of the property at dawn. If anyone's been near, I'll find their trail." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, they sat on the porch, the night air carrying the scent of damp earth. Mira rested her head on his shoulder. "You ever get tired of fighting what the world thinks you should want?" she asked. "I stopped caring what the world thought when I saw what I could have instead." She smiled into his shirt. "Good, because I'm not giving this up. Not for land, not for safety. Not for anything." He laced his fingers through hers. "Then we won't lose it." And beneath the stars, they sat in silence, the kind that spoke of two people who had stopped waiting for their lives to begin and had quietly started living them instead. The rains came by mid-May, hard and sudden, flattening the rye sprouts and turning the north path into a ribbon of mud. Mira stood in the doorway, watching water stream from the cabin's eaves, her apron soaked to the hem. Inside, Josie and Jude sat near the hearth, stringing buttons onto a length of twine Yates had cut for them. He stepped in from the lean-to, boots heavy with wet and an old oilcloth bundled around his shoulders. Mira handed him a towel without a word, and he took it, shaking the water from his hair. "You find anything?" she asked. "2 sets of tracks by the bluff," he said, rubbing his hands dry. "One of 'em's Briggs' horse, I'd bet on it, the other's lighter, younger gelding." Mira nodded once. "He's not giving up." "No," Yates said, "but he's getting sloppy." They didn't bother to cover their trail. She glanced toward the children, then back at him. "We wait too long and he'll stop circling." "I know." That night, when the storm eased, Mira laid a rifle across the table and began oiling the stock. Yates pulled a chair beside her, watching her movements with quiet focus. "You ever fire one outside of hunting?" he asked. "Once," she said, eyes on the barrel. "When I was 16. A stranger came to our claim, said my father owed him for a mule. He didn't, but the man didn't like being told no." My father told me to stay inside. I didn't. You hit him. No, but I made him think twice before coming back. Yates reached for the cloth. You think we should leave? No, she said. If we go now, we lose everything we've built. He's trying to wait us out. He nodded slowly. Then we hold. The next morning, Yates saddled the mare before dawn and rode to the western ridge to speak with the ranchers who'd once traded dried beans and salt pork for help mending a wagon axle. He returned with 2 men and a promise. If Brigg crossed onto the McKinley land again, he wouldn't be the only one waiting. By week's end, word spread. Not through letters or lawmen, but over fence rails and supper tables, passed quietly from one homestead to the next. Brigg's claim had grown wide, but not well. He'd taken too much too fast, and now there were men who'd started to wonder what might be taken back. Mira planted onions while Josie chased grasshoppers near the fence posts. Jude helped Yates patch the barn roof, learning how to measure pitch and brace a beam. The days lengthened and the wind turned warm. Then one afternoon, a rider appeared at the edge of the field, alone and slow. Mira stepped down from the porch, her rifle already in hand, but Yates reached it first and motioned for her to stay back. The man dismounted with effort. His coat was torn and a thick bandage wrapped his left hand. He limped to the gate and raised a hand. "Name's Thomas Brigg," he said. "Carlton's cousin. I ain't here for him." Yates studied him, then nodded once. "Speak your piece." Thomas shifted his stance. "He's gone. Rode east 3 nights ago, said he was done with this part of the country, left the ranch to rot." Mira stepped forward. "Why come here?" Thomas looked down. "He owed me wages, never paid. I figured if anyone ought to know he's gone, it's you." Yates crossed his arms. "You expect something for the trouble?" "No," Thomas said. "Just wanted to say thanks for standing up to him. Not many do." He turned and walked back to his horse. Mira watched him ride off until he disappeared into the trees. That evening, Jude brought in a bundle of mint he'd pulled from the creek edge. "It smells sharp," he said, wrinkling his nose. Mira took it and tied it with twine to hang beneath the eaves. "It keeps the flies off." The children fell asleep not long after supper, their hands sticky from the honey Yates had traded for in town. Mira and Yates sat beneath the stars, the air thick with the scent of damp grass and wood smoke. She leaned against his shoulder, her voice soft. "It feels different now." "It is," he said. "We're not waiting anymore, we're just living." She turned her face toward him. "I never thought I'd find something like this again, not after everything." He cupped her cheek, rough fingers trailing the line of her jaw. "You didn't find it. You built it." She kissed him then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that settled into the bones. When they pulled apart, her eyes were bright. "I want to marry you," she said, her voice steady. Yates blinked once, then smiled. "I was just waiting for you to say it first." They married beneath the cottonwoods 3 weeks later. No preacher, no papers, just hands clasped and words spoken plain. Jude stood proud with a carved ring box he'd made himself from an old tobacco tin, and Josie scattered yarrow flowers across the grass. Neighbors came bearing pies and jars of early jam, and the sun stayed high long enough for dancing. That night, Mira and Yates lay side by side with the window cracked open, the spring air slipping through, carrying the sound of frogs from the creek. Years passed. The coop filled with hens. The garden grew thick and green. Jude became tall and quiet like Yates, while Josie learned to play the fiddle from a passing traveler who paid for supper with song. Yates built a second room onto the cabin. Mira started a small school under the cottonwoods in summer, teaching the neighbors' young ones to read from her father's old almanac. Peace wasn't something that came all at once. It was forged like iron over flame, but it held. And in the evenings, when the fields turned gold and the air was heavy with the hush of dusk, Mira would sit on the porch steps with her hand in Yates's, and they would watch their children chase fireflies through the tall grass, knowing that nothing waited on the horizon but more of what they had chosen together.